It's a pleasure to be back. It's without a shadow of a doubt the best conference on the calendar. I'm sure people have probably said it this morning. It's a shame it's online. I'm sure everyone's suffering a little bit from the whole video call fatigue, as well as probably being told what the new normal is, what comes next for brands, anything else pandemic related. So as ever, we will endeavor to provide you with something valuable, original, entertaining to soak up. That is going to be reflected in our lineup today, where, as usual, we've tried to bring in new and relevant voices, diverse perspectives and opinions, so we can hear both sides of an argument. We can explore things from all angles. That's really, really important. I will just like to take a very quick second before I begin to add a note about our agency's founder, Eddie Moutron, who sadly passed away not 2 weeks ago. Eddie, obviously, for anyone who works in this industry, will be well aware that he's an industry and a regional legend in every sense of the word. If you're working in this industry at an agency, whether it was one that Eddie was involved in or not, or a client, you'll probably know about Eddie, and this industry has been shaped in part by Eddie. So it's been a difficult, obviously, couple of weeks for our agency and Eddie's family and closest friends. He really built agencies where culture, ambition, and togetherness was at the heart. And I'm very proud to say that I work for an agency that he helped build. So he remains in our thoughts, as well as his close family and friends, and I wish to dedicate this session to him today. But of course, I cannot dedicate a session to him without any panelists, so let me introduce them. These folks have been handpicked, not just because of their titles, but their experience, their journeys, their perspectives. I'm very excited to have them, so I'll bring them in very quickly. Firstly, from the board of directors of ASRAC, which is the UAE's marine conservationists. They're keeping our oceans clean and safe. A digital brand consultant and a brand unto herself. We welcome Amanda Rushforth. Good morning, Amanda. Good to have you. I'll move through everyone very quickly so we can get pushing. From the Cosmic Centaurs, which is not an American football team, but an incredible consultancy focused on the future of work and education. Founded during the pandemic by its CEO, we have Marilyn Zakawa. Good morning to you, Marilyn. It's great to have you. And last, but certainly not least, a man that knows the media probably like no other, tasked no less with educating the next generation and generations to come that will lift us out of the social mess we find ourselves in today. He is the VP of Comms for the biggest educator in the region, GEMS Education, Jonathan Bramley. You can call him John. So morning, everyone. Is everyone on the line? It looks as though everyone is. That's great. Great, that went really well. So brand purpose, it's nothing new. We've been talking about this for years, the idea of existing to do good, or making the intention of doing good at the heart of your model. This has been around for some time. Significantly accelerated in the social era, I would say, when consumers and publics could begin aggressively and loudly telling brands and businesses how it's going to be, what their expectations are, what they care about. They're better informed now as well. So you can no longer really be an ignorant brand where you're sort of just broadcasting messages to people and setting that agenda. But of course, today, pandemic times, that has changed again. Our universal challenges, from equity to inclusion, diversity, equality, climate, female empowerment, and more, have really been illuminated, you could say, brighter than ever before. And brands play a central role in this. They play a central pillar of the communities. They employ people in those communities. They sort of set the agenda on how these things are done. They have, obviously, a big carbon footprint in many instances. So they're really at the center of some of the challenges, and also the center of some of the solutions. So we as individuals, particularly our youth, and obviously the MENA region is one of the youngest in the world, they want to support those that are contributing to solutions. They want to work for those that are contributing to the solutions. And of course, we want to vilify and call out the ones who are not. If anything goes wrong, if someone misses a beat on a social issue or does something a little bit naughty, well, they're in big, big trouble. So how can we support these businesses in the region to be more purposeful now that we are fully aware of the challenges we face? How can we help them become better members of the community? What are the entry points and what are the challenges? We're here to unpack it. We're going to start with a very simple question. 79% of people are more loyal to sustainable brands and purpose brands. Sustainable brands are growing at a rate of around 69% faster than non-sustainable brands. And 64% of adults believe a brand's primary purpose should be to make the world a better place. Are our brands in MENA trying to make the world a better place? I'm going to give the question to Marilyn to begin with.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. That's a really tough question. I'll start by saying that the region here is also learning to build brands, in the sense that as I was thinking about today and thinking, you know, which brands in the region inspire me and how good have we been at building them? I think we start from a place of having a trading mentality here. So I'm from the region, so I get to talk about it, you know, without feeling offended. But I think that because a lot of our companies are based on trade and they're not based on building big brands, I think the first step for us is to learn how to build great brands. And then in that step, we can learn how to make those brands purposeful. So I don't think we've seen, you know, incredible examples from the region, but I do think that the pandemic created a stage for some of those brands to be able to contribute meaningfully. One that came to mind as I was thinking about today, that for me, at least as a consumer, I resonated with, was, for example, a brand like MAF. When the pandemic happened, they communicated often. Their CEO's face was always there, you know, saying how they were addressing the issues that were coming up. And they were very open about how they were trying to maintain jobs, how the frontline part of their business, which was in fact growing, was helping to create some stability for the other businesses that weren't, right, and that were hard hit. And so I think that the pandemic has shown us in this region how brands can also contribute to that conversation, and perhaps, you know, open the door for more brands to start thinking about how they can do it outside of a crisis and not just when the crisis hits.
So I'd actually love to jump in there, Joe, if that's possible.
Please,
I actually have an alternative focus point from a brand's perspective, where I'd say a brand that drives the consciousness, the purpose first, is a brand that's getting me as a consumer first. So during the pandemic, we had Pangaya, we had the Giving Movement locally, who started with that sustainability clause and the consciousness that came with those brands. And then it almost didn't matter what their product was. I was hooked because of the way they were selling it to me, being so consciously driven, and the giving back was almost more of a highlight than actually what, you know, they were selling. So I think if brands do start with a purpose first, rather than their branding and marketing of the trade and the product, I think the rest will come, because people are ready to commit to something that's bigger than just shopping or selling or retail.
100%. John, anything to add on that point?
Well, to me, it's all about authenticity, and that it's not just about trying to sort of hitch your wagon to the zeitgeist. It's about authenticity and actually doing something meaningful, constructive, and I think that the way brands are treating both their customers and their audiences right now, and I'm also looking to see the way brands are treating their own employees. One of the things that we're really proud of here at GEMS is that there's been very, very few, if hardly any, layoffs of our teaching staff through last year, despite the various pressures that we were under. And you would hope that that will be remembered by both the staff and also, you know, the parent community that we're working with, that we have the core values that are standing us in good stead at this time. We're also involved with a load of companies at the moment through internships, and we're calling them externships at the moment, because we're having to do quite a lot of them externally and at distance. But I wanted to talk, I was talking to a principal last night because I thought this question might come up. And he was telling me about working with Siemens. And they work with our students at First Point School, which is one of our schools. And they were working about looking at the school itself and how we could lower our carbon footprint? And the students were involved, and they worked together for 3 months on this project. And to me, that was just a great example of a company that's really walking the talk. And you know, the students were really invested in what was going on. So I love that kind of example. And you know, there was lots of other ones that I've come across since joining GEMS last year.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to jump on that, if that's okay. I just think the point about authenticity is very important, what Amanda said, which is that you don't stick on purpose-driven. You start from a place of being purpose-driven, and you make everything that you do, the way you treat your staff, what you tell them to do every day, the time you allow them to dedicate to that purpose, and how you communicate about it. And so I think that that's where you have to start. It's not just something you slap on.
Absolutely. I mean, Maren, you started. You talk about starting with purpose. You started just last year. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between, you know, legacy brands that perhaps didn't start maybe, you know, some years ago with this core kind of idea or maybe such a focus. You know, many brands, you know, when you sort of unpack them, there is obviously a real purpose at the core of those. I think that can get lost a little over time, but they do exist. But then, you know, more modern, more recent brands, you know, more startups, more, you know, entrepreneurs, they are now beginning to build brands with purpose and meaning, you know, right at the core of it. I mean, Amanda, you know, you work with a lot of startups as well, so you've probably seen this. And our youth, you know, we always talk about purpose for the consumer, right? The consumer is young and they want purpose, yada, yada. But we forget that a lot of these are now actually business owners and leaders themselves, and they are demanding that businesses are run with purpose at the heart. So I want to talk a little bit about the challenges for a legacy brand that might not be, you know, used to communicating their purpose at the heart. They're just not used to running that way, against these other ones that can come in and say, okay, we're new on the block and we run with purpose and meaning, and our product is brownies, but we're really all about diversity, and this is how it works. You know, we're a brew dog, for example, you know, in the UK, where we sell, you know, beer, but it's really just a platform for social issues. Obviously not without its challenges. But Maren, you built one during a pandemic. So could you take 30 seconds to talk us through your thinking at founding a company during the pandemic with sort of eyes on what the world looks like today?
Sure. So take a step back from the pandemic. I've had a very non-linear career. I'm an architect. I worked in tech for 10 years. Then I came to Dubai. I was the CMO of Amar for a year, and then the acting head of the Dubai Opera when the pandemic hit. And so the opera having suspended its operations, I was also too expensive to keep around doing nothing. And so in that sense, I was in a position of, I'm going to call it privilege, which is that I didn't have a job. I wasn't about to start looking for one. And I had a moment to think about how it was that I wanted to spend the next 20 years of my life. And I was able to look back and say, you know, while I've enjoyed a lot of the adventures I've been on, the few times where I felt like I was truly alive were the times where I was helping people to collaborate, where I was helping individuals come together and achieve more than the sum of their parts. And in that sense, I was in a great position to say, well, what can I do about that? And I could see that this was the beginning of the lockdown. So this was late March. Not all countries had gone into the lockdown yet. And I could see that one of the biggest barriers to how we connect to our communities and how we collaborate and create value in this world was going to be that we were all going to be remote, sitting in front of a computer all day long. And I wanted to help fix that problem. So in that sense, that's how I started Cosmic Centers. I actually started the company. I didn't even know what we were going to sell. I just knew which problem we were going to fix. But I imagine that that's very different from the brands that Amanda helps, which may not all start from that place, but they want to include purpose in how they work. And I'd love to hear Amanda's thoughts on that.
I mean, I'd love to say they all have that consciousness, but actually my biggest task is that I have to separate all my different platforms. And it does become an issue when I'm trying to cross over my personal beliefs and goals and where my passion lies with the marine conservation and my day-to-day business, which you know, revolves around a variety of different platforms at the moment, but digital marketing, freelance digital marketing is obviously bread and butter. I'm agency background. So for me, the conversation, whether it's, you know, for a startup company, or I'm looking after a company that's existed for 10 years, I'm thinking about whatever it is from content creation onwards from a brand perspective, because that's how I was trained. And sometimes the biggest conversation we have is, how do we put across a more human narrative to these brands, and how do we get them to connect with their audiences? And I'm a big believer in offline translates well to online. And it's that experiential activation where, even if it's just you know, a good morning from someone in a shop makes you want to spend money in there. If you have the same, I would say the same conversation online with your consumers, you're more likely to get a response, or a good response in that respect. So if you can be conscious in all your areas, whether it's you've got a brand that's perhaps a legacy brand, as you were talking about, and okay, I'm not going to name names, but I look after a few big FMCG brands, and one of them refuses to give up plastic bags. Now, it's fundamental to half my brain that they shouldn't have plastic bags anymore, because the rest of the world doesn't, and is awake to that notion that there are alternatives, or charge, or you should bring your own, or reward people and then more people will do it that way. But it's not a focus for them, and sometimes there's a mindset that's just too rigid to be able to change. So it's trying to bring in other areas to their world, which can be things like, okay, let's look at CSR. What are we doing from a CSR perspective? CSR in this country is not that important because there's no tax write-off. So it's very difficult to try and get people to part with their time and money for no reason in their minds. And I think that's where John, in particular, raising the kids around you with that concept that CSR, sustainability, it should almost be its own lesson, because I think it's such a big part of our future. I know at ASRAC we do educational talks to all the schools that are interested in having us, completely voluntarily, just to help get kids involved in that conversation from a young age. And we do even have a very big youth ambassador program, which is growing in popularity. But I find it very interesting how kids are the first people to point out, but why have you got a plastic bag? Why are you using a straw? I'll get pulled up by kids that are around us or what have you, and they'll sort of say to me, oh, that's a plastic bag. And I'm like, yes, but I brought it with me. So that counts as recycling. You know, it's that day-to-day challenge that you get, and it's the youth that are bringing that to us. So when we're looking as a consumer, bearing in mind most of our audiences are growing older, and we need to constantly, you know, employ and attract this very young audience and make them ambassadors growing up, and let them believe in your brand from the get-go. I think giving a strategy where you're, as you said, with the internships or the externships, making a big legacy brand believe more in, you know, the younger, non-existent audience yet, and helping them grow through a different mindset is super important. So with a startup, it's very easy to get them into that conversation. With a legacy brand, it is a little harder, but all the more necessary, I think.
Don't you think, Amanda, it's great that these days the consumer can so readily bring our brands to account? And you know, as you were speaking, the bottom line for me is when their bottom line is affected with the plastic bags. When young consumers start voting with their feet and saying, no, I do not want to go shop there. I will go down the road or shop online or whatever to a brand that gives me recyclable bags. You know what, I love hearing from our kids, because they do hold us to account. They do, you know, they are the first to say, why are you using plastic cups, or why are you using plastic bottles in the office? We need to walk the talk. And thank goodness that they are so imbued in both CSR generally and sustainability. It's part of the curriculum now. And you know, my company, it's not just about educational achievement, but it's also about core values. And these have come to the fore, particularly during COVID. So, you know, fascinating times. And I bought a car just the other day from a well-known brand, and the salesman was particularly interested once I bought the car that I gave them a good Google review. That was the first thing he said, not if there's any issues, give me a call or anything. Please, will you write something on a Google review for me? We have, and I'm going to be staying in a hotel later this month on holiday. And I know that they will want us to do a good TripAdvisor report. And we're very sensitive. If a parent's not happy, they won't necessarily go to the school to tell us anymore. They will go online, or they will go on Facebook, or they will go on WhatsApp. And we need to be able to react to that.
This
so
is 100%,
really interesting times.
Yeah, this is 100% the truth. But as you pointed out, we no longer walk down the street and go to a different supermarket if we don't like that one because of the plastic bags. People need to challenge the brand, and the only place they're interested is online. So whilst we can't be aggressive and negative in social media in this region, there is definitely a point that says if enough people message and go, why are you still using plastic bags? Change it, or hold them accountable on social media where they care the most, then there's more chance you're going to get through to someone in a higher level, because it will go through the ranks, as it were, as being a big point of contention from their audience. Now, whether or not these are the people that actually go in and shop at that supermarket, I don't think that matters. I think the fact that people are using their voice, albeit online, does help change these legacies mindsets. And as you say, they're more concerned about a bad Google review than they are actually 10 people in the store speaking to the wrong people. Everybody in the store doesn't really have any power, doesn't care. And I think there's also a cultural difference that says it's not as important. It's not a priority. Whereas I think for, our consumers, especially the audience who are digitally minded, it's very much a priority to be seen doing something better and to hold brands accountable that aren't.
But there were human aspects.
Sorry, John, just to jump in here. You've all worked with agencies, in agencies, out of agencies, with agencies, big companies. I was chatting to someone about this challenge just yesterday, and they said something really interesting, quite damning. The point being, which I think aligns with what both of you were just saying, which is that some of the reason why we get this wrong here, from an agency perspective, from a company perspective, all the way to any kind of service that you have. John, you were just mentioning, referencing car purchases there, is that unlike some other parts of the world, there's a real lack of long-term planning. Being prepared, it's reactive, it's always deal with the next problem, then the next one will come. So for example, the issue is going to be, let's get, not a day goes by, right, when you don't see some sort of copy paste response to a complaint online from a brand here, right? Give us a call, call our center, we're sorry this happened. It's just deal with the problem as it goes. That's a challenge that people seem to have here, whereas maybe in a slightly more mature market, brands have been talking about this a lot longer, and they plan long term, so they know that, as your point, John, they're not thinking about, okay, how do we keep the individual happy after each and every engagement, and this is our couple of tactics to make that happen. Ask for a quick review, ask for a 5-star, put this down here, sign this for us, but actually think, what's the long term actions we can take and changes we can make that will have a significant impact long term, to the point where we no longer need to do that. Do you think there's some weight in that point?
Yeah, I was looking at, Dove is one of those brands that were a legacy brand and were able to transform themselves through their Real Beauty campaign. And I was reading this yesterday and listening to a podcast about it, and a professor at Harvard who studied Dove said it's not a campaign anymore. It's been 2 decades, right? They started this in 2004. And what he was saying about how you make this truly part of your core, even if you were a legacy brand and you didn't start off with that, is 3 things, right? So the first one is CEO buy-in. You need somebody to be able to sponsor this and to be truly interested in the cause that you're supporting. But the second thing is they involve their employees in that action. So when they're doing campaigns and trainings for children in school about, body issues and sort of self-image, they send their employees to do that. Everybody in the organization is involved in the purpose that they've taken on. But also, and maybe that's the one that's, less easy to just say out loud, they obsessively measure the impact that this has on their business. Because if an economic downturn comes up and it's a CSR campaign, the first thing you're going to do is scratch it. But if you're able to show the business, the shareholders, the stakeholders that in fact, by being a purpose-driven brand, we are increasing our return on ad spend and all these usual measures, then we can say that this is fundamentally part of the business being successful. And in Dove, they spend more than 50% of their marketing budget on the real beauty, and only the other half or less on amplifying it. And so the person you were talking to, Joe, is making a very good point, which is it's not a campaign. It's not, oh, we have a bit of extra money, let's spend it on some CSR thing and then amplify it. It's about true commitment to how you're impacting the world and the community around you. And that's something that, yes, to your point, we're still lacking. We still plan a little short term, and it's difficult for us to see 5 years ahead.
But I think without the opportunity of seeing 5 years ahead or 10 years ahead, especially in the region we're in, we know that transient nature of people and brands, especially startups. I mean, I have a minimum 3 months contract, but some of them don't make it to that. Some of them don't make it past that. Some of them make it 3 years. It varies, and there's no one right algorithm for a startup. But I think where I was going with this was that whilst you can't have a long-term strategy yet, if you can put the right foundation in place, i.e. align yourself as a brand with something that does exist long-term, be it a charity or an organization that's doing something that's going to help align your goals, I think you're able to then see, okay, it might not be just a CSR, as you said, that gets thrown the first time, money's not doing well. It will be, this is our line of thinking, and whatever we do has to attach to this branch no matter what. And so to take this further, we at ASRAC just launched on the 1st of March a sustainable fashion directory. So it's the first in the region that's focusing purely on fashion, and it's open to all regional and local brands that have started up, and there's a tier system, and brands have to tick their sustainability points to be verified as a one of the 4 tiers that are on the website. And it's interesting how many brands think they're doing something, and when we question it, they're going, actually, we're not. We thought, because we said that we did no plastic packaging, doesn't account for the fact we're all plastic labels and we're all plastic zips and things on the garments and things like this. So you have to take into context there's a bigger thought process, but it means that they haven't thought about sustainability from the beginning, and they've looked for that route to, whatever it is they're creating as fast and as cost effective as possible. And as you said, they're aligning themselves too late down the line. So I think for whatever startup, for instance, on a startup basis, they have to align themselves right from the beginning in order to avoid this greenwashing that happens. But as a freelance marketer, and especially with agency background, as you were talking about before, Joe, we're quite lucky because we get to see a universal perspective. All these brands have ultimately the same cause, which is to grow and get bigger and sell. And as you said, it's that retail element of some description or trade. And I think with brands that are growing at such a rate, you've actually got someone like me who's freelance, or yourself, Marilyn, who's collaborating with all these different brands. You've got this ability to say, okay, you're actually all doing the same thing. Let's find one purpose that we can actually all come together on. You may be from completely different industries, completely different backgrounds, but you've got the same focal point, which is we are aligned with the fact we want to give back, or we're aligned with the fact that we want to start on the right trajectory or the right sustainability movement. So I find the most pleasure, completely without pay, being able to introduce people to other people, especially people who I know are looking for someone to help guide them, or someone to help build that bridge for them that's on a sustainable mindset or what have you. So even if it's, for example, creating a fashion capsule collection that I did with a local brand here, there is zero return for me other than I get to allocate 5% from every sale to my charity, to my organization that I'm part of. So that was my only goal with creating and putting time into something, was to basically give a route of sponsorship to an organization that I truly believe in.
Perfect. Thanks, man. We have to, sorry, John, I'm just going to jump in because we've got to fly through. I want to ask you guys for one-word answers on this final question. One-word answers. It's a good point of discussion. It seems as though there's a huge amount of reasons that can help brands, young brands, grow and to be purpose-driven, and then older legacy brands contribute a little bit more. What's the one thing from your perspective you think can help there? Are we looking at our influencers, educational influencers, the right channel? Is it partnerships? Is it, employing more youth? Is it education? What do we think? Amanda, John, and Marilyn, one word.
Education, 100%.
Sorry, but education too, I think is the right answer.
I just think authenticity. I don't think every company should want to be sustainable necessarily or want to fight for a specific cause. Find the one you believe in and do whatever it takes, I would say.
Perfect, thank you. And I will say,
it has to be the future, or there is no future. This is just, I think. Oh, well, we don't have any time, do we, Joe? Sorry. Forever on this.
We can go outside into the street and start and carry on with a megaphone if you want. But I'm
for a coffee.
But thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Marilyn, for plugging 2 Ogilvy clients without me even asking. That's great for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. That was a really fascinating, vibrant, provocative discussion. Thank you, Joe, for moderating it so well, really highlighting the challenges that exist and importantly, being so honest about it. And I think that's the key thing here, isn't it? We've seen so many discussions around purpose that are superficial, and it was refreshing to see one that kind of honestly assessed the challenges.